So if you were there, you live in Germany in 1933, and a strong leader has just taken over the government. He gives powerful speeches promising a better life for Germans. But he also speaks out harshly against Jews and other groups living in Germany. And he has arrested political opponents. Although some of your classmates are excited by these speeches, others are worried about the future. So I need to stop for a second and just think about what you would say to your classmates in that situation. Well, that goes without saying. Yes, Adolf Hitler is a racist. Fascism in Europe. So the years following World War I were difficult for many Europeans. Countries involved in the war suffered from physical destruction, heavy debt, and high unemployment. In addition, the Great Depression began in 1929 with the U.S. stock market crash and spread around the world, causing more suffering. Some people looked to strong leaders and fascist governments to turn their countries around. Fascism is a political system that places the interests of the nation above those of the people. It is characterized by extreme nationalism and military buildup. Mussolini's Italy. After World War I, Italy was plagued by economic troubles, strikes, and riots. A king and a democratically elected legislature governed the country, but many wanted stronger leadership. So in steps Benito Mussolini, a veteran of the war, who seemed to promise the stability that Italy lacked. In 1919, Mussolini founded the Fascist Party. 3 years later, he organized a rebellion against the Italian government. An army of his followers surrounded Rome, Italy's capital, in October of 1922. They brought down the government. Mussolini took power as prime minister. So think of prime minister as something like a president, a king, but without the royalty title. It's just head of the government. At first, Mussolini followed existing government procedures, but within a few years, he abolished other political parties and ended elections. He ruled Italy through both strict government control and the power of his personality. He's crazy. He's crazy. Mussolini was an electrifying speaker who attracted many followers. By 1925, Mussolini had become a dictator. The Fascist Party was Italy's only political party. It controlled nearly aspect of Italians' lives. There was no freedom of speech, and the fascists controlled all newspapers and other news outlets. Mussolini dreamed of creating an empire and restoring Italy to greatness. One way he aimed to achieve these goals was through the conquest of other countries. In 1935, the Italian army invaded Ethiopia, a country in East Africa south of Egypt. Now, we know that Ethiopia is one of the only countries that stays independent through imperialism. So the fact that they invade it is crazy. The Italians used poison gas against the Ethiopians. Within a year, Italy had colonized Ethiopia. The League of Nations condemned the conquest, but it had very little power. Remember, the League of Nations was created by Woodrow Wilson, except the United States refuses to join it. Yeah. The hostility from Western democracies caused Mussolini to draw closer to other European countries ruled by dictators, including Germany. So Germany and the rise of Hitler. Germans also suffered from the effects of World War I and the Great Depression. The Treaty of Versailles, which ended World War I, was very hard on Germany. The treaty stripped Germany of territory and forced it to make reparations, or payments for the injuries it had caused during the war. The conditions of the treaty weakened the country's economy. Many Germans fell on hard times. They resented the difficulties caused by Germany's defeat and the harsh treaty. One of those frustrated by the conditions was German army veteran Adolf Hitler. In 1919, Hitler joined a small German political party that he renamed the Nazi Party, and he quickly became its leader. He was a strong speaker, so just like Mussolini. So people like that draw people to their attention and draw people to them because they are such good speakers. So they get drawn in with their words. And people are like, oh, well, he sounds so eloquent. We're going to go ahead and follow him. Why not? He must know what he's talking about. Huh? We'll find out. Hitler and the Nazis attracted many followers. Hitler believed that Germans were a, quote, master race. of people superior to all others. He blamed other groups for Germany's problems. In particular, he blamed Jews, whom he thought were an evil and inferior race that lived off of other races for no reason. He had no other reasons to believe that. In addition, Hitler wanted to expand the territory of Germany, especially to the east, where others of German heritage lived. Hitler's ideas became the basis of the Nazi Party. The Nazi Party's popularity increased as the Depression wore on because the party promised a better life for Germans. In the 1932 national elections, the Nazi won more seats in the national legislature than did any other party, and Hitler was one of those elected. Early the next year, Adolf Hitler was named Chancellor of Germany, or the head of the national legislature. So again, Chancellor is basically like Prime Minister. Within a few months, he had assumed total control as a dictator. He declared the Nazi Party to be the only legal party in Germany. In the following years, Hitler eliminated communists, Democrats, and Jews from government jobs and from universities. He also banned all trade unions except for Nazis' workers' groups. He ordered the execution of leaders with whom he disagreed. He created a political secret police called the Gestapo to investigate and put down any political opposition. These actions are characteristic of a totalitarian government. So basically, he eliminates anybody that has free thinking. Anybody who promotes free thinking and can think for themselves, like Democrats who usually have the election system, he gets rid of them. He's like, no, it's a threat to him. Totalitarianism is a system in which the government controls all areas of people's lives. There are no individual freedoms. A dictator or small group of rulers holds all the power, and dissent or disagreement is not tolerated. One of Hitler's first objectives was to remake Germany into a world power. Building up the German military was central to that goal. Hitler greatly expanded the army, and he created a new air force. Hitler's aim was to expand German territory, and he knew that expansion meant war. Stalin's Soviet Union. In addition to condemning Jews and other groups, Hitler frequently spoke out against communists. He viewed them as a threat to Germany and the German race. One of the targets of Hitler's hatred was the Soviet Union. The Russian Revolution had taken place in 1917 as World War I was ending. Bolshevik leader Vladimir Lenin, a founder of the Russian Communist Party, became the head of the new communist government of the Soviet Union. Lenin was a powerful leader who crushed all opposition. When he died in 1924, there was a fierce struggle to succeed Lenin. Joseph Stalin won that struggle and became Soviet dictator for the next 25 years. Stalin was a brutal dictator who ruled by terror. There were no individual rights or freedoms for the Soviet people. During the 1930s, he consolidated power by having his rivals executed. Stalin also executed many military leaders, Communist Party bosses, and industrial managers. Tens of millions of people lost their lives under his rule. So Stalin is basically just as crazy and just as awful as Hitler was. People just don't know about it because it was far more quiet and done under wraps. And what the Soviet Union was doing, again, we kind of were just like, he masked it very, very well. Stalin was I already read that. Stalin was also imprisoned millions in a system of labor camps across the Soviet Union known as the Gulag. Political prisoners were arrested and sent to the Gulag where they could be starved or executed for refusing to work. Early in his rule, Stalin decided that the Soviet Union would never catch up with the world's advanced nations by gradually increasing industrial and agricultural output. Beginning in 1928, he instituted a series of 5-year plans for economic growth. The goals of these plans were increased heavy industry, agricultural reform, and military buildup. To increase farmers' output, Stalin established a policy of collectivization. Peasants were forced to give up their private farms and become part of large group-based farms. Many peasants resisted, especially the ones who owned larger farms, and Stalin enforced the policy through executions and mass arrests. Stalin's 5-year plans came at a terrible cost to the people. Collectivization led to mass famines, so like disease regarding food as a famine. Millions of peasants died as a result, and by 1937, However, Stalin had successfully industrialized the country. The Soviet military had also become one of the strongest in the world. So we're going to turn to Japan. So military dominance in Japan. Although Japan never had one single dictator like those in Europe, a group of military leaders slowly gained complete control over the government during the early 1900s. Japanese aggression toward other countries in Asia began after it was victorious in the Sino-Japanese War in 1895. As a result of the conflict, Japan gained greater influence over Korea and took control of Taiwan and other territories. In 1904, the Japanese launched a war against Russia to prevent Russian influence over Korea and Manchuria, which is now part of northeastern China. After a year of fighting, the Japanese were victorious in the Russo-Japanese War. Japanese military leaders were intensely nationalistic, meaning they had great pride for their country and would do anything to see it succeed. They wanted to expand Germany through conquest. Emperor Hirohito took the throne of Japan in 1926. In theory, he had control over both Japan's government and its military. But Hirohito could not control the military extremists. In 1931, Japanese troops stationed in Manchuria and Korea took over all of Manchuria and set up a Japanese-dominated government in the region. Japan's civilian government in Tokyo had lost control over Japan's army, and by the mid-1930s, most of the important government positions, including prime minister, were filled by military officers. In 1937, the Japanese military moved into China and took over most of the Chinese coast. Major Chinese cities were also occupied. When the Japanese army seized the Chinese city of Nanjing, Japanese soldiers destroyed more than a third of the city's buildings and massacred tens of thousands of Chinese. Japan now dominated most of the Asian territory near Japan.